Well, Ukraine says it is reinforcing troops in the eastern town of Avdiivka, which is under threat of being overrun by Russian forces. Moscow has been trying to capture it for months. Its military has pushed deep into the area, forcing Kyiv to withdraw from some parts. Avdiivka's fall would be Russia's most significant victory since it claimed the city of Bakhmut last May. Ukraine says the Russian military is trying to encircle the town, with fierce battles taking place around the region. Kyiv says its troops are still standing their ground. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says it is sending as much support to the town as possible. As the start of Russia's invasion nears its second anniversary, the front lines in Ukraine have become largely static, with neither side making significant gains in months. Russia regards Avdiivka as a gateway to Donetsk, but analysts believe its capture would not have major consequences on the battlefield. It will give Moscow a symbolic win and boost President Vladimir Putin's re-election campaign ahead of next month's polls. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in Germany for the Munich Security Conference. He is aiming to secure more military aid from European allies as a multi-billion-dollar aid package from the US is held up by Republicans in the House of Representatives. Mr. Zelenskyy and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz have signed a security deal to ensure continued support for Ukraine. President Zelenskyy will also sign an agreement with France later. Details of these pacts have not been announced, but Paris says it aims to provide long-term aid. The Israel-Hamas war is also set to dominate discussions in Munich. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will meet with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. They are expected to discuss Israel's military operation in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis. Well, Kurt Vulka, Distinguished Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, joins us live from Munich. He is also a former U.S. ambassador to NATO and a former special representative for Ukraine. First, Mr. Vulka, if I could discuss with you fresh, breaking, but mixed news of Alexei Navalny. We heard earlier that his press secretary said reports of his death not confirmed at this stage, while Latvia's president is claiming he was murdered. What do you make of all this?
Well, we've seen many reports now, particularly from Russian media, that are claiming that Mr. Navalny is dead. So I think we should take that at face value. That is likely the case. And whether you think that Russia deliberately killed him or not, you can certainly say that they created the conditions that led to his death. He was poisoned several times. He was imprisoned. He was kept in solitary confinement. He was put in very harsh circumstances. All of this seeming designed to take a toll on his health. And sure enough, it did so, and he died in prison. And I think you can only hold Russian authorities responsible for that. And
what I hear you saying, Mr. Vulka, is that the impact of Navalny's death, if confirmed, would be viewed negatively, would have Russia being viewed negatively on the international stage.
Well, of course, and Russia is already viewed very negatively on the international stage, partly because this is what happens in Russia. Putin arrests his political opponents, he disqualifies them, he poisons them. Nemtsov was shot outside the Kremlin. This happens in Russia. That's already negative. In addition to that, he unprovoked invaded neighboring Ukraine and has brutalized the population, killed thousands and tens of thousands of people. His forces have committed war crimes. So it is already viewed very negatively. This is what we have now come to expect from Putin's Russia.
Mr. Vulka, let's turn to Ukraine next. And we all know President Zelenskyy is in Munich. He is looking for continued support from European allies as well as the U.S., but both are struggling to keep up aid to Ukraine. In your opinion, how much can Mr. Zelenskyy realistically get from this conference?
Well, I think he is going to succeed in getting renewed commitments of military and economic assistance from Europe. It takes time. Europe is stepping up its defense industrial production in order to be able to supply more ammunition for Ukraine. They're also providing more financial commitments, and that's already been decided in the EU. In the United States, I'm very confident that this package of aid for Ukraine will get approved as well. It's not hung up because of debate over Ukraine. It's hung up because of debate over the U.S. southern border and what needs to be done about that. I think we will get through this, and I think we will be in a position to provide that aid to Ukraine fairly soon.
We're almost 2 years into the anniversary of Russia's invasion. President Zelenskyy has to date changed his leadership in the military. Progress on the front line is slow, if not stalled. Russian forces today, we hear, pushing into Avdiivka. Are we at a point where we can say Ukraine is losing or perhaps has already lost?
Not at all. So several things on this. First off, when it comes to winning and losing, we have to be clear about what we're talking about. Ukraine will survive as a sovereign, independent European democracy. Putin's objective is to eliminate Ukraine and Ukraine as a language, as a people, as a national identity. Putin is never going to succeed at that, and Ukraine will succeed and they will survive. So in the grand scheme of things, Ukraine wins. When you talk about what's happening on the battlefield, the lines have not moved very much now for well over a year. It is very difficult trench warfare. Everyone is dug in now in defensive positions. Whether or not the Russians take Avdiivka, it's really not going to matter the direction of the war. Ukraine is low on ammunition right now, but they have more precision ammunition, and they are able to hit Russian targets with precision. They are trying to disrupt Russia's ability to supply its forces in the field with some success. And we saw, for instance, that they took out a Black Sea ship of the Russian fleet just yesterday. So this is going to continue on as it is for some time yet to come.
Get your thoughts next on domestic U.S. politics, particularly former U.S. President Donald Trump and his recent comments encouraging Russia to attack NATO if they don't pay their dues. What's your reaction when you heard that?
Yeah, well, it's very unfortunate. It's not an appropriate or constructive thing to say. We see what Russia is doing to Ukraine right now, and the effects of war are horrific for the population. You should not wish war on anyone. And to say that Putin should do whatever he wants with NATO allies is absolutely terrible. In addition to that, NATO was formed in order to prevent war, to provide collective defense so that no one would ever attack and there would never be a conflict. But what Trump is doing is suggesting that there should be a war and that Russia should attack, which would be, again, horrific for everybody.
Let's look at the relations between U.S. and China, very much in the spotlight. Secretary Blinken will meet his Chinese counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in Munich. Is this the year that both sides perhaps move away from the tensions of last year and meaningfully improve relations this year?
Yeah, I think that's important, actually. China is clearly watching what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. China clearly has its designs on Taiwan, but I think that this is not as reckless and as dangerous yet as what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So it's good that we take the opportunity to try to lower the temperature, to have a normal dialogue, and to see if there are ways that we can avoid conflict, which I think is far better for everybody than escalating the rhetoric and escalating the tensions as we had seen a year or two ago.
Now, the conference continues to have a packed agenda because it's also focusing on the war between Israel and Hamas. Have the U.S. and European nations been effective at all in getting Tel Aviv to somewhat tone down its military operations in Gaza?
Well, not really. I think that Israel feels a lot of pressure from the outside to do as much as it can to protect civilians. But at the same time, it knows that Hamas is fully embedded in that civilian population and is fully intent on continuing to attack Israel now and in the future. So Israel feels it has no choice but to continue its operations. And none of the comments or pressure from the U.S. or European countries has really made a dent in that. For Israel, it's a question of national survival.
So if that is the bottom line for Israel, will anything convince it otherwise, or anyone?
Not in terms of going after Hamas. I don't think anyone is going to have an impact on Israel's determination to eliminate Hamas. What we can do is try to continue to focus on the difference between the civilian population of Palestinian areas and Hamas as an organized military group, and to try to work with Israel to get humanitarian aid to the civilian population, and to try to make sure that there is an outcome at the end of all this that allows for normal, peaceful lives for the Palestinians again.
In the dying minute that we have, Mr. Vulka, let me bring Russia into this discussion. NATO says that Ukraine will eventually become a member, but careful still not to get into direct confrontation with Russia. How can the alliance walk this line, this balance between letting Kyiv in and not avoiding war with Russia?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think there are so many contradictions in NATO's position right now. Either you decide to bring NATO or Ukraine into NATO, or you don't. And by saying we will, but we won't now because of the war, only encourages Putin. It's a signal to Putin, keep the war going if you want to keep Ukraine out of NATO. And we shouldn't want that war. Secondly, I think that we're not going to see security in Europe again until Ukraine is a member of NATO. That Putin has now declared his intention to rebuild the Russian Empire, to take over neighboring territories. That's something that's going to lead to more and more war. So we need to actually give Ukraine the tools that it needs to stop Russia, defeat Russian forces in Ukraine, and bring them into NATO as soon as possible if we want to get back to a situation where there is no prospect of future war.
Mr. Vulka, we appreciate your thoughts setting the tone ahead of the Munich Security Conference. That was Kurt Vulka, Distinguished Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Many thanks.